science fictional kind of universe, and that's a better explanation that's going to
Yeah.
hang with everything else in your universe a lot better than like, oh hey, all of the mythologies are real. And to some extent they do have that on the fringes, because like Hercules is a real character in Marvel Comics, and
Uh-huh.
every once in a while you get some weird stuff going on with the Greek pantheon. um there was a side, or a tie-in mini series to the Secret Invasion event where Hercules put together, they called it the God Squad, and he took them all out into space to go and kill the Skrull god who was like inciting all of this, like who was inciting the Skrull invasion in the first place.
Hmm. That's that sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, it gets a little bit kooky, but you know what? And that's part of
That's
what
part of
makes
comics.
it so fun, and that's part of what makes the MCU so fun, in stark contrast with the DC movie universe, which is not fun ever.
Except when you go back um to like 1960s Batman, then it was fun, but like way too fun. Like,
then it was very silly. Then it was
yeah,
like
way too
nitrous
silly.
oxide kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about before, but like the Michael Keaton Batman back in like the
1989.
yeah, I was gonna say late '80s, early '90s. Like they
Like
had some
89
fun, and
and then
like the
92.
Joker was definitely a homicidal maniac, but he definitely had a fun streak when he was dancing around to Prince songs
Right?
randomly.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. And there was, yeah, right. But I'm talking about the DC extended universe that is part of all of the most recent movies, starting with
Yeah,
Man of
yeah,
Steel.
yeah, yeah.
Like
I
none of
gotcha. Yeah.
that is fun.
So one of the things we just touched on leads nicely into something I wanted to talk about with Thor. The whole thing with explaining, basically divine properties as being, advanced races, aliens. And there was a quote in there, which actually in the movie they were quoting a scientist or somebody. I can't remember who they were quoting. So there's going to be some geek out there that's going to be upset, but just try to
There's
keep your
always
panties
some geek
straight.
out there
And
that's upset about
yeah,
something.
don't get your panties in a wad. I can't remember who they were quoting, but the quote is, "Magic is just science we don't understand." And I love that. Another thing that viewers might not know about me is that I'm a chemist by profession. I only have a bachelor's degree, but that still makes me a chemist.
Yes,
and,
he is a real scientist, TM.
and so, and also being a scientist that is a Christian makes this sort of subject kind of near to my heart, because I often argue that things like miracles and things about God, divine stuff, that God basically, he made the rules and his rules are the science. And so when we see a miracle happen, like when we see Jesus raise somebody from the dead, I think it's just science we don't understand. I think God
Now, does
is
that imply that it is science that we can understand at some point?
potentially, like, I don't want to say yes, I want to say yes, absolutely, but then the part of me that knows that there could be some things our mortal minds just can't wrap themselves around
Right.
makes me say maybe not. But and I don't necessarily think it's something that we will ever discover ourselves as human beings. And we could get into a whole discussion here about, like, do we really discover things by ourselves, or does obviously God is the author of everything, and I I would describe it as he puts the spark in the minds of the men who have invented things, and if
Mm-hmm.
not, he made them, so he's sort of,
Right. He's
you
given
know,
us our capacity
indirectly
for
responsible
creativity in the
anyway.
first place.
Right. So that's a topic I really like to talk about, because I love seeing that in movies coming out where Doctor Strange, and other things that aren't movies, like The Name of the Wind, which you encouraged me to read, Rothfuss's World, where the magic there is very much framed, although he doesn't come right out and say it, as just science that a lot of people don't understand.
Right.
Um, and so,
Yeah, that's another thing we're gonna just have to do a whole episode on.
yeah, yeah, um, yeah. So I like that, and I often think about like the things that we don't understand that God does or things like that. I often like to wonder, kind of like, when Jesus raised somebody from the dead, was he literally utilizing some kind of science that we don't know?
Yeah.
Or like, and it could be as simple as literally being the guy who made the universe. He can just, at the quantum level, manipulate the particles, and then up to the micro level, like manipulate the molecules and atoms and things to rearrange back to where they should be, to make this lump of flesh live again. You know.
Yeah.
But like all of that, I still think is something that if God allowed it, we could understand it and know like how it worked. And there was something else that was going to... so the other thing that ties into this is, one thing I loved on rewatching Thor was seeing there are a lot of connections to, like, there are a lot of things that remind me of like the Judeo-Christian God and Jesus in this particular movie. One of the things was Thor's mom, which I can't remember her name. I know she's like a character, from the comics and everything, and from Norse mythology.
Yes, her name. It will come to me. It's going to come to me in like the middle of something you'll be saying here in 5 minutes, and
just
then I'll
yell
blurt
it
out
in the middle of when I'm talking. But she says to Thor, or maybe she said it to somebody else. At some point, Thor was banished for being an arrogant jackass. Yes, yes, he totally was at the beginning.
He really was.
And we'll get into this later, but this is one thing I love about the movie, and why I think it stands out above some other MCU movies, is just like the characters of Thor and Loki are just fantastic. Like the character development and stuff, how like at the beginning I'm rooting for Loki because Thor is an arrogant piece of crap as far as I'm concerned, and Loki seems to be the one that like has his head on straight, right?
Right.
And then, and so we'll get into why I think Loki could be like a perfect, if there is such a thing as a perfect villain in a story, Loki's one of them.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting back to what I was trying to talk about earlier, I rabbit trail myself, it's like,
yeah, you
do. Thor's mom says to somebody, Odin, she might say the All-Father, always has a purpose to what he does. And that reminds me so much of God the Father, who I've seen so much in my life, and I know you have in your life, seeing like some of these bad things that happen, you look back years later, or maybe even not as long, and be like, man, that was all so that this good thing could happen.
Oh, yeah.
Or like, man, that was terrible at the time, and I was like, what the heck are you doing with my life?
Right.
But then looking back, it's like, well, I learned this, and it put me in a position to be available for this next opportunity or thing that you want me to do. So that was kind of like a ding, in my head, as far as, and I know you have the same kind of thing when you see like themes in movies that also connect to like Christianity themes.
Yeah. And it's nice when they're kind of subtle and they're not like, used as a bludgeon to bash us over the head with, because this is something that drove me nuts when I watched Man of Steel for the first time. And he's in the ship talking to the hologram of his father, and he says, he's sending him out. He's just given him the suit, and he says, "You can save them. You can save them all." And he like falls. He like floats back out of the ship, and his arms are stretched out, and it just made me groan out loud. I'm like, yes, okay, he's a Christ figure. We understand.
You know what's funny though? Is that I must be pretty dense because I didn't catch that.
See, I'm watching for it now so much.
Yeah.
Like anytime, like when you have somebody who's about to go do like a saving thing or like a sacrificial thing, like so much you'll see them in this pose of like their arms outstretched in like a crucifixion pose.
Yeah.
It gets really ridiculous and like
Did
just
they do
over
that
the top.
in Matrix Revolutions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But so at first I didn't like it, but one of my friends at Cedarville mentioned to me, she was like, "Oh, I loved it. It was like when he was fighting Agent Smith in that final battle, she was like, just pay attention to the dialogue. It's like literally things that you would hear like dialogue between Jesus and Satan while he's on the cross. Like, and that's something I'd like to do too, is like go back and watch those and look for those themes. Because I think that would be pretty cool. But anyway,
yeah,
back
maybe
to
when we're
Thor
done with
again.
with the MCU rewatch leading up to Infinity War, maybe we can go back and do the.
I'd be
Matrix.
interested in the Matrix just because one of the things is I like 2 and 3 a lot more than most people do, and I would love to give my reasons for why these are actually like maybe not good movies, but good like philosophical discussion movies.
Oh, sure.
Because there's lots of great philosophy in the second one, and the third one has lots of great like Christian allegory. Mm-hmm. But anyway, the other thing, getting back to the Christ figure thing, is while Thor doesn't make like a really good like 1-to-1 analogy with Christ, because obviously he's kind of a jackass at the beginning.
Jesus didn't come to Earth because he was banished here because he was a jerk.
Exactly. Yes, for sure. But like at the end, so like he's banished, and Odin basically puts some sort of
enchantment,
magical / technological enchantment on the hammer on Meownir, so that the next person who picks it up has to be worthy. And that quote from what's her name, who we all should know the name, and again another nerd is freaking out because we don't know the name of the wife of Odin, says he has a purpose to what he does, referring to the whole. It just reminded me of like a father figure too, of like he's disappointed with his son, but he provides a way, like almost like a test to redeem his son, which is again why Thor is not a 1-to-1 like Christ figure analogy, because Thor was also redeeming himself, right?
Yeah.
But the whole thing where like the hammer wouldn't respond to him until he had put like everybody else above himself and his throne.
Yes.
Which is what Christ did when he came down here. And so in being willing to sacrifice himself to the big, ironically, just like a Sentinel from X-Men thing, he was, deemed worthy, and he could get the hammer again. And so that was kind of just a cool thing that I noted, that like, oh, there's potentially a Christ figure analogy. And also the tie-in where when he finally does that and he becomes basically like who Thor is supposed to be, it sort of reminded me of like the resurrection. Yeah. And so like he essentially gets, or not essentially, but like analogously gets resurrected. Yeah. And when Jane Foster sees him, figuratively, that's the word I was looking for. He gets figuratively resurrected, and Jane Foster sees him for the first time, essentially reresurrected, and goes, "Oh my God!" And
that's one of the greatest moments in that film. I love it so much, and it's not just the choice of words, but the way she delivers, like, "Oh my God. Like,
And I don't know if the writers